book or in a poem or a novel, it is visual to every reader in a different way. You know, describing, I might describe something as intimately as I want, the color, the touch, but even then the thing will come across differently in the minds of different people. Whereas in a film, you are actually given. The sensory nature is not, you know, so I think, you know, I was just quoting Arundhati Roy's comment about the God of Small Things, that, you know, she said it's a deeply visual but stubbornly unfilmable book. And obviously that book, even after 20 years, hasn't been picked up for a film, even though everybody agrees it's visual, and Roy himself is a screenplay writer. So I think, and I had much less to do with films than Roy did, I understand it much less. No, I certainly wasn't. I certainly wasn't. I was aware though that theatre plays a very key role in this novel, and it was interesting. There are many scenes from plays in the book. There are many scenes from plays. So there are whole chapters which are actually theatre scenes where the play is happening on stage and the audience is sitting and reacting to it. Like what happens, you know, when you see a loved one die on stage? When you see a loved one, a mother kissing somebody else on stage, what is your reaction, and how is the audience react? How do you feel sitting in the audience? So those things are very important. And but what I felt was, and I was actually, there was another event on the Firebird where the playwright Mahesh Dattani was talking about the book, and he really enjoyed the book. He had some very flattering things to say about it. But one thing he said what struck me was, this book will be very hard to come alive on stage, but it will work much better on film. And of course, I hope it does come alive on stage sometime too. Maybe I'll look to you for that. But it's very interesting, you know, why something works well on stage and not on screen, or vice versa, or even something like, you know, why something works on, you know, Netflix and not on a screen. So I was at this Mumbai Film Festival What to Screen award, and I was talking about my books, and it was sort of a room full of producers and distributors, and how somebody was telling me that, oh, these days, you know, film producers only want something on the scale of Avatar or Bahubali, because people these days only go to watch movies which are like 1,000 crore or $100 million budget, that kind of scale. The moment something is not as big as spectacular, they prefer to watch it on their device. They prefer to watch it as a Netflix series. So only for Avatar and Bahubali there are films. For everything else, there's a Netflix series. So my point is, even within the visual medium now, there are divisions. You know, what is large-scale film, what is indoor film, like the sitcom. So this is not a learning experience. I honestly didn't know anything, and even when I sit down to write, none of this is in my head, because I'm just writing as a writer, a deeply sensory writer, who often imagines and touches and hears a setting in my head, but the moment I transcribe that setting, it is fated to come across as different to the reader. That is the difference between a filmmaker and a writer.
Now, the titles of your books, The Firebird, Silverfish, and now The Scent of God, they're so perfectly crafted, I think. I mean, how much thought do you put into, you know, how important is the title to you, and how much thought goes into that perfect work?
You know, they just come to you. I mean, I think I hate to say this, that there's something truly mystical about the creative process, because, you know, we have to always try to demystify it. But it's something almost praying to God. You know, you just have been working at the perfect sentence, and it just doesn't come, and then suddenly you're in the shower and then it just hits you. It just comes. It's like you be at it. Titles are like that. You know, they just come at a completely irrational moment. I think with Silverfish, I had to really work at it. My first novel was about, you know, a manuscript which is kind of eaten by moth and silverfish. So the silverfish became a kind of important metaphor. The Firebird came from the mistranslation of a Bengali play, Aguner Pakhi, which was performed as the Aguner Pakhi here, the French play. And that play, that play plays a key role in the novel. But also fire plays a big role in the novel. You know, theatre and fire often goes together. Stages are set to fire. The Scent of God somehow just came to me. You know, it just completely natural. And I guess what drew me about this name is, I think as a writer, I have been very drawn to the combination of the abstract and the concrete. You know, I think this matters even more in poetry, that writing has to have a sensory element, deeply immediate, but it also has to have an abstract moment, because without experience, there's no Without the concrete, there's no experience, but without the abstract, there's no understanding. You have to always move back and forth. And the scent of God, for me, captured this, because the scent is something very concrete. It's very immediate, it's very sensitive. And what is more abstract than God, right? I mean, there's a paradox I felt in the title, The Scent of God. I mean, which is probably not even there in The Scent of a Woman, which wasn't there in my mind when I wrote it. It just came very organically because The Scent of a Woman, famous Al Pacino's famous line. It's like, it is definitely very real. But what about The Scent of God? So I think it just hit me, and I have a habit of making the title occur at least once in my novel when it comes, and it does occur only once in the novel, only once. And I think that for me is a kind of key moment when the title appears in you. So, but it was, again, as I said, it's a mystical process. I don't know how it came.
And so let's go into The Scent of God. Let's have a little taste, a little teaser before. And I think this is a very special moment for us because the book hasn't been launched yet. And since we are talking to Saikat about his processes and about the writer at work, I think we're incredibly lucky to be able to hear a chapter from his book. So, over to you.
Thank you. I mean, the book, as I said, is not real yet. This is kind of just a moment before it. So I'll read the very brief opening chapter to give you a sense of how this is panning out. So all the chapters in the book have a title. They don't have chapter numbers, but they have chapter titles. So the title of the opening chapter is The Magic Wrist. Whenever India played Pakistan, the villages in Mosulgaon wanted India dead. For the boys, that was the best reason to watch cricket on TV. The village was just outside the walls of the hostel. Their roars and firecrackers were real, an enemy of their own. That Saturday, India was to play Pakistan in the semi-finals. But even such excitement paled next to that of watching it in the common room of Bliss Hall. It was a dark festival. All 80 of them packed on the floor of the room, on the thick ribbed carpet. The door was closed and weak sunlight filtered through the glass pane of the windows. Garish light flickered from the TV set perched on the table in front. Just to give a context, this is set in a hostel. It's a boys' hostel which is run by a monastic order. And the things that happen there. So these boys are living together in that hostel. The boys wanted to shout and scream, but for Kamal Swami sitting on a chair at the back. Kamal Swami was unbeatable on the cricket field. His aim like Arjun. His saffron robes flapped wildly in the wind when he bowled, and before you blinked, the ball blew up the wicket like a child's toy house. But he rarely spoke during match screenings, only once in a while to make a rare forecast whether a batsman would stay or get out. And he was always right, so that scared the boys a little. In the darkness, the common room became a maddening place. No one could see anything. It was like a movie theatre. The blue flannels on the screen and the frenzy of cheering spectators on the stands, all that was visible in the common room of boys who cheered in whispers. The crowd drove them crazy, for the match was happening in Peshawar and the Pakistanis wanted to drown the Indian batsmen in the fierce war cry. From time to time, the boys wanted to smash the TV screen, claw at the brute Pakistanis who waved massive green crescent flags like weapons at the heroic Indian batsmen who fought their killer bowlers. Cut their dicks off, Bora whispered softly at the TV. Dicks slit already, Baisali Chatterjee neared, bloody mullahs. Firecrackers going at Musalgaon, someone whispered. They cheer whenever Pakistani bowlers get a wicket. They lived and breathed with the village. One could see the thatched huts from the rooms of the C block, and if they stared hard, they could also spot muddy-looking women bathing. The villagers hated the ashram, and they wanted Pakistan to rub the noses of the Indian team in the dirt. Slit dicks. Baisali Chatterjee roared again. The name flew and hit Chatterjee like a thunderbolt from the back. Kamal Swami's voice always pierced like an arrow. Chatterjee crumpled up like a withered flower. He looked big and burly and already had hairy temples and upper lips, but it was easy to crack him, as under the loud body of a bully, there was always shame, the shame of hairy whiskers and upper lips in class 7, and the reminder that he was a man among children. Silent's voice had not touched him. He never rested till the last equation on his homework was solved to perfection, and nobody ever found a balled up sock under his bed. Was he really watching the match? Or just looking at the TV because they were all supposed to? To watch the Pakistani leg spinner Abdul Qadir was to die laughing, but to face him on the pitch was to face death. Balls pitched at perfect length and spinning up to a foot to kick the balls off the stumps. A deadly googly where the ball struck the direction opposite to where it was supposed to go. He danced like a cripple, trying to twist at the disco, and it was painful to watch a man do such things to his body. But they had stopped laughing as the ball that came out of the dance was an arrow of death for the batsman. The silence became more pointed. Watching Qadir was a bizarre kind of a delight. He began to twist a dance to the wicket, and the whole room leaned forward. Anirban's weight rested on the palms played on the carpet on either side, ready to attack. The ball fell on the perfect length before the leg stump, and the batsman tried to drive it towards the long arm. The ball caught the edge of the bat and shot at the off stump like a snake stump. The hawk at the slip caught the ball, and the Pakistani team howled like a pack of wolves. A gasp went up in the dark room, and Anirban clenched his fingers to feel Kajol's palm in his own. It was a soft and small palm, almost like a baby's. The anxiety of the moment was a disease, and he had to share it. A curly-haired 16-year-old boy had appeared to face the Kyle of Abdul Qadir. His name was Sachin Tendulkar, and he had raked up some massive innings in domestic tournaments. But he was just a boy, and the devious Qadir would slaughter him soon. They waited. Anirban had not let go of Kajol's hand. It was beginning to feel strange, and the moment couldn't last forever. The moment one slapped his neighbor's thigh or clenched a hand in excitement. But he held Kajol's palm and sensed the moisture in them, the moisture coating his bony knuckles. He was a boy really. This Sachin Tendulkar, a curly-haired boy who could perhaps play in the older boys' school team. It was absurd and delightful to see him in the massive cricket gear, the pad and the helmet and the heavy bat, among the real and famous cricketers. The boys were just happy that Walker Yunus, the deadly paceman, was not there to strike blood with his bouncers. He would come back soon, but the trickster Qadir would happily send the boy back to the safety of the pavilions before that. Anirban unfurled each of Kajol's fingers slowly inside his palm, like he was playing a secret game of numbers with his digits. Kajol had smooth, well-trimmed nails. Anirban ran his fingers over them and imagined his tiny nail cutter tucked away carefully inside his desk, where everything was arranged like a library catalogue. He was the kind of boy who never trimmed his nails on a day he was not supposed to, like a Thursday, or the day of the week he was born, just like his mother had told him. One who set aside the 2 days in the week when he clipped them after his bath, when they were soft. Anirban's heart beat wildly. Sachin Tendulkar took guard to face Abdul Qadir. Anirban caressed Kajol's fingers, feeling the spot behind his knuckles where the skin wrinkled, the spot below it where tiny hairs had sprouted. So tiny and so little, it was almost hairless. Qadir did his fatal dance. The ball pitched and spun madly. The boys wanted to close their eyes and not see the terrifying sight of the balls flying off the stumps. Suddenly the curly-haired boy changed into a battle stallion and hooked it wildly over mid-wicket, a sixer. The boys gasped and almost forgot to cheer. And then they cheered, a wisp of sorrow in their voices. What a spunky boy! He will kick before they kill him, soon. Anirban squeezed Kajol's hand. His fingers slid back, caressed his wrist, the baby bone awake on the corner, the veins of his pulse that made up the soft belly of the wrist. It was his to play with. It did not question Anirban's claim on it, doing whatever he wanted to do with it. He did not dare to look at Kajol, but knew he stared at the TV. Did he resent having to watch cricket? Perhaps the rowdiness of the Pakistani spectators made him wince. The camera focused on Abdul Qadir, returning to his dancing run-up. A smile danced on his lips, a cheerful sneak. He would now kill the boy, spill his stumps wide open. Borak closed his eyes and said something under his breath. It was some kind of a prayer. It was odd to see Borak pray, as if he were ill and had no idea what he was doing. The ball pitched right on the middle stump and spun in the wrong direction. A googly that would sting the leg stump. Smoothly, the curly-haired boy pulled the ball over long leg, out of the field and out of the wall. Who was this Sachin Tendulkar? Who was this boy really? What kind of guile had made his wrists. Anirban's heart leaped. Kajol squeezed his fingers quickly, clumsily. Anirban glanced at him through the corner of his eye. He looked straight at the TV. Where did he have his heart? In Peshawar? Or with the algebra left unsolved in his room? Somewhere else? And then Sachin Tendulkar sent Kadir outside the stadium for a third time. His wrist turned like the arc of a revolving planet. The spectators were quiet in sudden mourning. The boy's chest hurt with pride and were about to explode. The firecrackers had died out there in Musulgan. Kadir was smiling. The bastard was game. Everything felt right. Anirban wanted to bring Kajol's delicate wrist to his mouth, suck his soft baby fingers one by one. There was an ache in his loins. Everything was taut. Take that, you split dicks, Baisali Chatterjee howled. Turn off the TV. Kamal Swami's voice struck out like a slap across the room. Anirban pulled out his hand sharply from Kajol's. Before they knew it, Shunanda Dey stood up in the front row and turned up the television. He loved to follow the vilest orders of the Swami. He hated to see his classmates happy. The boy with the magic wrist was gone.
Okay, I'm going to jump right into it, okay? Teenage sexuality in a boarding school. Teenage sexuality in an all-male boarding school. Teenage sexuality in an all-male boarding school run by a monastic order. Saikat, what are you doing? Yes, what are you doing?
Well, when you write, I mean, I guess it's hard to. I don't know what it is. Honestly, one doesn't think of implications. One doesn't think of what is disturbing one is writing, because it's a process on which you really have no control. All I know is that I'm the kind of writer who needs a speck of real life inspiration. It just has to be a speck, and then even if you invent and make everything up, the world has to be something you must have experienced in some form or the other. And I think it's a reality. Being in a boarding school, it's the. I think the memory of how we all attain puberty, we all have that, because the great thing about writing as a child is there's a lot of talk of writing as something that you're not. So the great thing about writing as a child is you're writing as another, but it's an other which you were once. So it's not exactly another. We all were children once. If I write as a woman, it will be different. I was never a woman. But I think the interesting thing is how sexual awareness comes to us around puberty, and I think there's a moment when the sexual awareness comes which is almost pre-gender, and that is something which really occupies me in this book, that you crave a touch. You crave a touch, you crave some kind of human warmth. It's almost erotic in a Freudian sense, where it's just seeking out. And at that point of time, I don't think it matters what the sex of the other person is. And then it's very interesting, of course, we live in a heteronormative world, so we are socialized into a certain kind of sexual desire. But I think what really occupied me was, this sort of pubescent sexual development. The boys are watching TV, there's this crowded, this kind of dark hall where things going on, and at a moment of excitement he holds the hand of the boy sitting next to him, and then they keep holding hands. They just don't let go, and it's almost like an accident. But then they realize as time goes on that they're holding hands even when they're not required to. Oh, you hold, yes, oh my God, he hit a sixer. You just have to do that. And then the hand just stays there. And then slowly you realize there's something else going on. That, I'm enjoying the feel of his hand. And when you're holding somebody's hand, how the hand is responding. Is the hand just sitting there? Is the hand also active? So these things start happening. And these are the things that really occupied me. Again, I'm a very sensory writer. The sensory moment is what I get lost in. It does happen to be in a boys' hostel. It's a monastic order, and there are such institutions around, but those were secondary in my mind. It was really the reality of this kind of sexual awakening which drove me in writing this.
But surely after you, I mean, as a writer, I mean, like there's a first draft, a second draft, and an X number of drafts, then there's the editing process and everything. So once that initial, you know, the ghost of writing helped you write and you finished, surely there must have been a moment where you kind of recognized the sensitive nature, to, you know, use a media-friendly term, the sensitive nature of this book, of this storyline?
Yeah, I did realize it, and you know, the excerpt you read in Caravan already got into some but I think I mean like I said, you don't control what you write. You know, I mean, I feel when you feel like I want to write this story, I choose a subject, I feel that's a bit artificial. You know, stories and subjects possess you, you don't have control. And so I wrote, and then when I wrote, I felt, honestly, it was not my goal to be sensitive, it was not my goal to, you know, sort of upset anything, and I think it's still a, you've read some parts of it, it's a pretty, and people who've heard it can say what they feel. It's still a very soft and unobtrusive kind of a narrative. And I don't think I've said anything that doesn't happen in life. You know, it's all real. Obviously, the process is about selection. So a writer doesn't necessarily fabricate. I'm actually not the kind of writer who makes things up. But of course, fabrication is a relative term. What do you choose to highlight? Why are you choosing to highlight this aspect of hostel life, the erotic aspect, as opposed to, I could have written the entire book on sports, I could have written the entire book on it, but I did choose to highlight this aspect. And in as much as you choose to highlight something, it's a fictionalization. But it's not fictionalization in the sense I made it up. So I know it's sensitive, but all I can say is that there's nothing here which is not real.
So, in the process of writing this book, and one of the main themes of the book, or two of the themes, sexuality and spirituality, what did you discover? I mean, what did you feel? Need sexuality and spirituality be mutually exclusive?
Absolutely not. I mean, that's the fascinating thing. I mean, it's religion plays a very important role in this book, and religion also in a very sensory way. And I don't mean the kind of Orientalist version of sensory religion, the tantric and all that, but the very fact that there's this in a prayer hall, the smell of incense, the sound of a song, a bhajan, or that sense of that sensory quality. And I feel obviously having grown up as a Hindu, I guess even if you are not very religious, you would still call yourself a Hindu because that's the way it is. You realize that it's an incredibly sensory religion, especially in comparison to something like Protestant Christianity, which is much more abstract. Catholicism has this sensory element because the canon of saints and the kind of mass has a sensory element, but the Abrahamic religions generally don't have that. And yeah, exactly. So that it has that sensory, very tactile. Catholicism has that, but
for us, the offerings, the prashad.
Exactly. So for that sensory element, the sound, the feel in a temple, or even the feeling of songs, and this was very real, and this is a part of the Bildung. In a way, this novel is also like the Bildungsroman, a kind of a coming of age story, and this is something, as you know, has preoccupied me in my last novel, The Fire God, was also a kind of a coming of age story. In a way, a story of a coming of age which goes wrong. Bildungsroman is about growth into a responsible citizen, whereas in that novel he becomes a kind of destructive person, but it's still about growing up. And how in the process of this growing up he is drawn to religion, is drawn to the idea of the spiritual life, is drawn to the idea of monastic life. But at the same time, the body speaks. So this is also the time when puberty is attained, one attains puberty. And how that spiritual life and that sexual awareness intersect. And Of course, in a setting which is very intimate, because it's a boarding school, you are living with a certain intimacy with everything. You're taking showers, you're living, you're every single thing. I mean, when your friend cuts his nails, you know the feeling. You've seen the nail cutter, so that immediacy is very much part of your life. And what happens? What happens here? So in a way, yes, the spiritual and the sensory at least come together, and sensory does also tip over to the sexual. It does happen.
Stylistically speaking, how are all three of your books different? Writing style-wise.
I think they're quite different. I think the one unifying fact is they're all. I mean, the third book is not set in Calcutta, but in suburban Bengal. But Bengal, I have been called, by reviewers and critics that I write Bangla novels in English. So that is a feature which I think I take that as a huge compliment. That the idea of the vernacular writing in English is
I can actually, feel them. They can easily be written in Bangla. Not just because of the setting, I guess, but because the language would lend so beautifully to what you write. So it's very easy to actually imagine them in Bangla. Yeah.
That being said, you're right. But that being said, I think my aesthetic training is very Western, and I studied the various my MFA is from American University. So I think my sense of craft is also very Western. So it's now being translated into Bangla, and I think in some ways they are hard to translate because the syntax is not Bangla, but the values are very much so. That being said, I think my first novel, very much feels like a first novel. It's something I look at with a little bit of affection and embarrassment. Silverfish, I think some people here have read it, but I think that's where I was writing as kind of in awe of literature. I think you write, I'm the idea of the art object, and also I approached Calcutta, even though it's something I've grown up and known intimately, in a slightly anthropological way. So there are these things like traffic jams and whatever processions and all that. I think in Firebird I really made a kind of a transition, and the biggest transition was I think it's a far more physical book. It's a far more raw and visceral book. It's a book which is not touched by abstraction. It is and it has obviously deeply personal connections. It's about this boy who's processing his difficult relationship with his mother as an actor, and even though the story is invented, my mother was also an actor. So I know that feeling, and the opening scene of the novel that the boy is watching his mother dying. This is a childhood memory I have. At the age of 5, I remember the terror of actually watching my mother die on stage, and it's really powerful. And that, so the thing is, I think this became a much more visceral book. It was not at all an intellectual book. By that, I don't mean not difficult, but intellectual as abstract. It was very sensory. And same with The Scent of God. Both of these books, they possess me. It's again, to answer your previous question on the sensitive. I know it's a sensitive subject, but it's a story I felt I had to tell. And this compulsion I felt, is kind of unites these two books. That being said, I think The Scent of God is a bit different from The Firebird because it's a slightly slower, there's more humor, it's a lighter book in some ways, but also quieter. The Firebird had a more dramatic kind of I felt it while writing. From the writer's perspective, what it feels like as a reader, it's for all of you to see. But all I'll say is that with both these books, the most important thing is I felt that they demanded, they just held me with a scruff of my neck and you have to tell the story. And that for me is a happy sign when I feel the story controls me, I don't control the story.
So, Saikat Majumdar, writer, storyteller, chronicler of our times, how do you define yourself as per your writing?
I don't know about our times. I haven't written anything set in contemporary, Calcutta yet. I feel I have. This is an ongoing debate I have with a friend of mine, another writer, Anjum Hassan, who talks a lot about how do we write about the contemporary? Isn't it important? And I always see that a writer has really no responsibility. It's not like I have to chronicle the contemporary. You write whatever possesses you. You write, and in any case, isn't it still contemporary? Even if I'm writing about the 80s and 90s, I'm writing it now. So in a sense, it is contemporary.
It's a contemporary viewpoint.
It's a contemporary viewpoint. It's a contemporary viewpoint of what, I don't believe in a lot of research. I was once on a panel about writers that research, and one of my co-panelists was Vikram Chandra, who was talking about how he wrote Sacred Games, and he was talking about that, oh, I went and spoke to the mafia people and I interviewed them, and then, when my turn came, I feel like I'm not a research-driven writer. I much admire the works of Amitabh Ghosh, but I wouldn't write like this. For me, what I've done is research my own memory. In a way, okay, this world of theatre, I knew it as a child, and now they're all in ruins. So what does it feel to stand next to a theatre house which is now abandoned and full of cobwebs and dust? That feeling is my research. So I don't know about contemporary. I think that his time is very strange. I mean, who knows what part of us is still in the past, what part of us is in the future, what part is in the present. So historians have done very interesting work on that. Time is not a linear thing. We are always in knots. But that being said, I think that, going back to the question of the film, I think I'm getting a very interesting perspective on that, because there was a point of time, there was a talk on that, can we bring it up to the present moment and replace theatre by television serials? Because part of the anxiety was that, oh, this understanding of prejudice against the actresses is no longer a reality. So there was, people won't understand it. Because film is a popular medium, they need to resonate with the people. And will this be out of turn with the current moment? The people don't understand why this prejudice. And then after much thought, we realized it's impossible. We have to stick to theatre. Because the novel captured certain conflation between theatre and prostitution. Certain conflation between, what it means to be a woman acting and what it means to be a prostitute, or at least a public woman, which is very symptomatic of late 20th century Calcutta. I mean, beginning with late 19th century. But I think that milieu is now gone, because obviously that kind of theatre is now dead. So, in a sense, it's very instructive for me to see what things can be brought up to the present. Another thing that
even the moral policing that is prevalent in the Firebird, people, because we are citizens of our times, we just look at the kind of moral policing that goes on in our day-to-day lives. But we forget that moral policing has always been there, and that is what the Firebird also explores, where the para culture almost becomes like a villainous third character in the book. And it's all because of that policing that takes place, which helps to set the, events that eventually transpire in the book.
No, absolutely. And I was asked to write something on moral policing by the right-wing parties. This was in 2015 or 16, when something I wrote, actually an excerpt from this book, got into some trouble. And I said that, moral policing is not the sort of the whatever marker of either right or left. We are talking of moral policing by the right, but obviously in the 80s, and the communist government in the 90s, they were very much into this, the idea of opportunity, the idea of what is right, what is wrong. And I think in this book, in the Firebird, definitely how the political presence is not just at the kind of legislative assembly level, but in the tea shops, but in the local para, and eventually in your bedroom, like, oh, why does a woman come back home at 10 in the night? Why does she leave her house at 6 dressed up? What does it mean? And the echoes of a woman dressing up and leaving the house at 6 immediately brings up another kind of a woman who leaves the house. And how a kind of vigilantism, certain kind of vigilantism in neighborhoods in the para sort of ties into political bullying is very much the subject of that novel. And again, talking of the contemporary, the filmmakers have been talking that, oh, the CPM doesn't resonate anymore. It's like nobody cares about it. So we'll play on the realistic angle. So the realistic angle is something very relevant. So it's very interesting how, but I think moral policing, you're absolutely right. It never goes away, and it doesn't belong to any one political color.
I know the audience probably has some questions as well, so 2 short ones left from me before I throw it open to the audience. As a writer, how easy or difficult is it for you to kill your darlings? I find it very, very difficult. Once I've written it, I find it very difficult to, oh, but that sounds so nice over there. It may not be doing much, but that phrase sounds so nice or looks so pretty over there. How easy or difficult is it for you?
This has been one of the most transforming experiences. I had to sort of delete and cut the most beautiful sentences. It's like sort of that's again writing the Firebird. I've learned that you know one can have a beautiful sentence, but if it's not a team player, it's like look at me beautiful, then it has to go. It has to go. I mean, I have no mercy. It's like because I think we read too many books which are just too smart, too clever. They're like, oh God, look, I'm so smart. And I think literature is not meant to be smart. It's not meant to be clever. It's meant to touch the reader, not just in the heart, but the entire body. It has to be touching. And I think cleverness is it's a kind of a trap. You don't fall into it. So I think I'm trying to perfect the art of writing badly, actually. I'm not to put it in a different way. I mean, it's only a truly great writer, of course I'm not saying anywhere there, but a truly great writer can afford to write badly. And my favorite example is actually B.H. Lawrence, who has a lot of bad sentences, bad in a kind of conventional sense of craft, and whereas someone like Joyce was always well crafted and all that. I think you have to cultivate a certain indifference to craft. You have to, you can't just be obsessed with that shiny bit. There has to be some rawness, there has to be something messy about and it's not all about covering up the mess, it's about letting the mess show. Once you're at a point when you are not scared of the messiness, then I think, it's okay. It's a kind of an unlearning. And I find it, yeah, I've done it. It's painful, but you just do it.
Okay, which brings me into something that I wanted to talk to you about right in the beginning, which is letting go. And letting go here as a writer, I mean, like you've now allowed your book to be made into a film. How it depends, of course, also on how involved you are in the whole filmmaking process. So, how difficult is it because for me, The Firebird is, it is a story from the boy's point of view, and I could actually see a film being made from the boy's point of view, but the director feels otherwise and feels that, it should be from the mother's point of view. So that's one thing. So how easy or difficult is it for you to let go? And then you're talking about translation, and you being a Bengalian who can read and speak the language, I mean, like, would you be involved or would you rather not be involved? Do you recognize it as, okay, no, this was my job as a writer. I had to write my story. Now this is what they need to do and what they should do, because they are the master of that craft.
Yeah, definitely the latter. I mean, I think the only thing that matters is what they're creating is compelling art or not. That's the only thing that matters. I think the very fact that somebody wants to possess your work and do something with it is a great honor. And I think if they want to possess your art, then they have something genuine to say about it. So just to take this example, that I don't think he wants to make it the mother story, but he wants to make the mother more central. And I think that is a latent thing that is already in the book. He's just bringing it out. It's like, I once heard that poet Kartika Nair say that, to rewrite the Mahabharata in a subversive way is not to go against the grain, because all those subversive things are already in the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is just you're drawing out the potentiality and making it real. So I think, in a sense, the mother's story was also latent in the Firebird, but it was latent. It was, the obvious part was the boy's story, obviously, because it was easier for me to write from that perspective. And the director plans to pull out a latent thing. And I am really not at all, keen to sort of stay with it as long as I feel it's compelling. Here I'm evaluating something as a reader or I'm no longer a writer. Is this a compelling way of presenting what? That's all I care about.
So I'm being asked to wrap up. So one or two questions from the audience before we say a big thank you to.
First, two quick questions. So I think the Scent of God is visually stunning and a stubbornly filmable book. When you think of that, and for me is that the question of being a local writer. So one of the things that unifies all your three novels is that you are very local. I would call you a Bengali writer writing in English, but very local. But many of the writers who have become commercially successful in the West, even if they tend to be detected as local writers, they're actually writers who are engaged in conversation with the West, including The God of Small Things, which is sort of a local book, but it's actually a book in conversation with the West. So So would you ever want to write a book which may be local at some level, but actually engages in the conversation?
That's a really great question. I think you're absolutely right. I think the West is very narcissistic and it does want to see itself in India. And obviously the other thing is it has certain notions about how it wants India to be represented, and I don't think any of my books subscribe to that notion. It's neither a old Raj, exotic India, nor is it the new call center India. It is this theatre in Calcutta. It's not in the imagination. So I mean, the response in America has been very different. It's been obviously a kind of low scale. As I said, I don't choose subjects. I don't think it matters. You have to be genuine. It so happens I am, sort of working on a book set in California right now, and it's like a children's book almost. It's again, I guess the thing that I'm stuck to is the child's perspective. It is a very little young girl's perspective, a 5-year-old, 6-year-old girl's perspective of California and how she identifies with it. But again, I don't care about the place. I lived in California for 9 years and I have a relationship with it too. And because my daughter was born there, she's now 8 years old. It's very interesting for me to process. For the first time it came alive when she formed a relationship with California. I wasn't, because I was this academic, I was a bourgeois person, there was a distance. So I don't think that's a factor for me. And I'm actually very happy to be a local writer because those are the kind of writers I myself enjoy reading. I think, and it doesn't matter where the location is. I mean, modernist writers are deeply admired. Look at Dublin, look at Faulkner's American South, look at or any Indian writer. The ones, I think the most deeply universal writers are the deeply local ones. And for me, a work really resonates when it has a sense of place, real deep sense of place. And I don't think I could ever write for, you don't write for an audience. Of course, after you finish the book, all those thoughts come in your head. But you're absolutely right. I have been a very local writer, and I think even my California book will actually be very local. It will be deeply, stoutly local. So again, it doesn't matter what location one has been. It's about having a real relationship with the place.
Any other questions or? Well, I think we're done at Saikat. It was great talking to you. I can, of course, keep talking to you for the next couple of hours. Thank you very much. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the Center of God, and I wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you, Vaishali. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You do it. It's a great honor.
Thank
you all.
Thank you all very much.